All right. Well, I think that gives people enough time. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our July 13th, 2023 Abbeville Institute Zoom webinar. We're pleased to have Bobby Horton join us. And so we've had a couple of celebrities the last two times. We had Cooter Jones a couple weeks ago, and we've got Bobby Horton tonight. This is really exciting. We've had Bobby with us before. We actually had him at our summer school several years ago, and he did a performance for us. It was a lot of fun. But just want to kind of fill you in on everything. So what we're going to do is we're more or less have a conversation tonight. We're going to talk about Dixie and Southern music and whatever else meets our fancy. But if you want to ask questions, you can use that little Q&A button at the bottom, or you can ask them over in the chat bar. You can do it either way. And of course, I'll go through the questions and maybe get your question asked to Bobby Horton. Just a reminder, though, this Abbeville Institute webinar is sponsored by the Institute. So if you like what we do, if you like our webinars, podcast, website, all the stuff that we do, please consider that donation to the Institute. We do exist on your generous contributions alone. So Bobby Horton, of course, is a nationally recognized musician. If you've watched anything on PBS, any kind of Ken Burns documentary since the 1990s, you've heard Bobby's music in one way or another. And so he's done a lot of that. And of course, he travels all around the South and all over the United States. He's a music historian. And he loves Southern music, and he loves that 19th century music. And I think that's what makes it so much fun, because so much of that music was lost in many ways. And he kind of created a 19th century music renaissance there with that Ken Burns Civil War. People got much more interested in it, I think, at that point. And so I brought a lot of that stuff back. And of course, you can go to bobbyhorton.com, get all of his music there. I know that it's available on streaming because I do stream it sometimes on Amazon Music or some Spotify, some of these places. So you can certainly listen to it that way too. But Bobby, it's great to have you on the program, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, Ryan, thank you. I'm so very, very happy to be here. That's a delight. What a pleasant way to spend what night is this? Well, Thursday night. It's so good to be with you and everybody, whoever's out there. Yeah, it's a delight. Thank you.
Well, we set this up as we're going to talk about Dixie. And it's a song that's so maligned nowadays. I mean, you play Dixie and immediately you're persona non grata in some circles, or it shows that you're some kind of evil person because you love the song Dixie. And so we were going to talk about that a little bit tonight, the history of Dixie. There's this idea that, it was written by a couple of black folks in Ohio. And then, of course, there's the other side of that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But can you give us a little history lesson on the song Dixie and how important it was for so many decades for American music and also American culture?
Well, Dixie has a wonderful history because it's unexpected. A lot of times when I perform, I'll ask them, I'll say that Dixie was written by a Southerner, correct? And they'll say, nothing. And I said, no. They're written by a fellow from Ohio. Said it was premiered after the Southern Confederacy was formed down in Montgomery. And they said, of course, no, it was performed. It was actually April 4 of 1859 in the Mechanics Hall, and which was a music hall up in New York City. It was not premiered in a Southern city. It was, Dan Emmett was is given credit with the music. I know there is a controversy, or was, that it was written by a couple of black folks from Ohio that lived down the road from Dan. And that's pretty much, I've talked to several historians. I get to work the riverboats on the, Mississippi, Ohio River and all that. And I'm around a lot of historians and frontliners and ones that are gone now, like Dr. Bud Robertson. They don't believe the story. And I don't remember the particulars as to why. But one of those historians went into great detail as to why he didn't feel like that was true, that Dan Emmett, in fact, did write the thing. Now, he may have been influenced by a song that he had heard, no doubt about it, because I think minstrel performers back then, wanted to be around black people to hear how they sing and play, and that sort of thing. But Dan Emmett, like I say, premiered it in April 4 of 59. And it's written originally as what they call a walk around. And a walk around is just a happy little tune that is to be designed to be sung while they set up the next act. And that's why they call it a walk around. And the interlocutor, the guy that was running the show, was the MC, more or less, would sing Dixie sometimes. And And that was why it's written, and it went over so big. Dan Emmett sold the rights to Dixie for $500. So, and I don't know who bought them, but somebody made a lot of money because Dan just got made $500. Now, $500 was a lot more then than it is now, of course. But, you know, if you really read the words or you study the words of Dixie, you know, it's about a man who married a woman because she had money. And the guy was a weaver. And back then, weavers were supposedly, you know, you couldn't trust them. I guess he's like nowadays a used car salesman. But then you couldn't trust a weaver. So Will the Weaver was a gay deceiver. And anyway, the song is about that. And then so when the South formed and the government formed, well, that's a pretty lousy fight song for a new nation. That's why Albert Pike wrote Everybody's Dixie, which was more about the war, you know, which the soldiers really liked. It. Everybody liked the song Dixie. In fact, Lincoln first heard it. President Lincoln heard it in 1860 and loved it so much he clapped loud. And his quote was like, let's have it again. Let's have it again. He was hollering that out. So, you know, he heard it in 1860 and it was his favorite song, which is another irony. And, you know, there are ironies in history that make it so interesting and so true. The song Battle Hymn of the Republic was actually not written by a Union person from the North. It was written by a fellow who was from South Carolina originally. And his William Steffi was his name. And he wrote Say Brothers, which is the chorus is glory, glory, hallelujah, glory, glory, hallelujah, glory, glory, hallelujah, forever, evermore. It was meant to be sung at a camp meeting. And G. Ward Howe took that song and borrowed the chorus and made Battle of the Republic. So you have a Southerner writing the Yankee fight song and a Yankee writing the Southern fight song. So it's interesting histories. Now, Dixie, on the night of April 8th, of 65, right the day before General Lee actually formally surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia, Lincoln was being serenaded by a band. And after they finished the concert, he's asked them, they asked him, said, Mr. President, can we do one for you? He says, yes, I'd like to hear Dixie. So we haven't owned it for a long time, and I think it's the finest song ever written. And so then they played, the Yankee band played Dixie for President Lincoln right before, like I say, General Lee surrendered. So it's got a fascinating history, and it really didn't go out of fashion until I guess what I'd say the 90s, sometime in the 90s would be my guess. And you know, ironically, I had the honor to play in Washington D.C. on the 150th anniversary of President Lincoln's second inaugural speech. And I did in New York, Avenue Presbyterian Church up in Washington. It was a big deal, you know. But that morning, they were out at the Lincoln Memorial. They did a program at this, you know, in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and there were a bunch of big shots up there talking and this sort of thing. And I did 2 songs that day on the steps. I did one called Lincoln and Liberty, which was Lincoln's, it was written by Hutchinson for his second run for the president. That was his campaign song. The second song I did was Dixie, and I got everybody there to sing with me. And it was almost surreal, you know, being there in Washington, D.C. And what 5 years ago, whenever the 150th was of his second inaugural. And it was surreal, but, you know, everybody was singing it. It was kind of remarkable. It's on C-SPAN. You can see it because a lot of people don't believe it. So go see it. It's there. It's in their archives. But anyway, wow. It moves people. It's a lovely, you can play it fast and happy. You can play it sad. And, you know, it's just a beautiful, beautifully constructed, simple song, you know, and it evokes emotion on both sides, the ones that love it and the ones that don't. So, and I'm sorry about that history has been kicked around like that now. But anyway, I do love the song. I think it's just wonderful.
I've always loved your slow version the best. I mean, and of course, you had it played all over the place and all kinds of artists. I mean, this thing has been covered and covered and covered. And you mentioned the 1990s. I mean, I think now, well, you had, of course, Ken Burns' Civil War out in the 90s. So
1998.
There was certainly a renaissance there in thinking about this. And so maybe the late 90s, I would say, but I mean, that it became out of fashion. But when you think about the 20th century and the performance of Dixie in the 20th century, again, I had Ben Jones on a couple of weeks ago, and he loves Southern music, and he sent me a disc not long ago, Cooter, and he sent me a disc, and it had all these outlawed songs, and almost all of them were different versions of Dixie, which was hilarious. But if you could pick somebody that's done it, that's your favorite, who would be your favorite artist that's performed it or covered it in any way, besides yours, of course, which I love yours, but anybody else that's done it?
I can judge mine. I know where all the fluffs are. There's a the 26 North Carolina is one of the most famous bands in the Confederate Army, and there is a 26 North Carolina band now. I mean, there are people that play their arrangement. I love that band arrangement because that's the one that got to rally the troops, and that's one of my favorites. I like Second South Carolina. I love to hear that. Those are good guys, and I like the way they do that. I like them all. My heart. When people do old music, our ancestors' music, it makes me happy. If they do it poorly or goodly, Right. So I really like that. I mean, I love that era for music. There's so much about that era that is so unusual, and music, I think, was more important to our ancestors during that time because that's all they had. They didn't have television. They didn't have movie houses. They didn't. Most people, especially in the South and of course in the rural North, didn't go to plays much. They didn't have opportunities. And so you had to make your own music. And really, Brian, in my opinion, music changed. And I'll tell you when it changed. This is just my opinion, but when Mr. Edison developed the recording machine, because prior to that, songwriters wrote songs for just everyday folks to sing, and people sang. Every time they gathered, they would sing. It was what they did. It's they express themselves, and it was just an integral part of society and gathering. And nowadays, because of recordings, songwriters write for recording artists as opposed to regular folks. And now, like you compare the Civil War and the war between the states with, say, World War II. Well, Glenn Miller was playing music for him. Bing was singing for him and on recordings, You know what I'm saying? And back then, but during the war, during the 1860s, you had to make your own music or hang around somebody that could. And so it was different. The music was different. It was simpler in a way, but in a way it was more emotional because people connected to it. So it's fascinating to me just because it was that important, to just the common folks, So,
well, you mentioned the Battle Hymn of the Republic and the Southern origins of that, at least the tune for it.
Well, and, even most of the words in the chorus, were
right in the chorus.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that aren't aware of that, how important the South was even in these gospel songs that ended up being other kinds of tunes. You had Singing Billy Walker in South Carolina and Benjamin Franklin White, right, and all the shape notes,
right,
the Southern Harmony, Musical Companion, all that stuff. Sure. And I know when we've had you perform, I had you do Beach Spring, which of course was, I think you do Billy Walker's version of that, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. And, the text is called, let's see, not How Tedious and Tasteless. Come, you sinners, poor and needy, weak and wounded, sick and sore. Come, you sinners, poor and needy is what he called the text. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And so there's all of that mixing in the 19th century, and we forget about that. And of course, when you look at these old songs and how many people borrowed from each other, that would be plagiarism. Now you'd have lawsuits over this, but in the 19th century, that happened all the time. I mean, people just borrowed, even going back into symphonic music, and Bach borrowed from this person. That they all borrowed, sure. And so you have that trend in the 19th century, which is different from today. And do you think that made it to where music could be more popular because people would know that tune? Oh, this person put the lyrics to that, and I added this little bit, and so it made it more familiar for people as they just lived life and they heard this tune there, or went to church or sitting around the fire or whatever it was. You had all that borrowing, which made it much more rich in some ways. Do you think that's the case?
Put their own stamp on it. Exactly. You know, you're on something, Brian, and I've actually thought about that as well. The fact that there were copyright laws were not in place like they are now. Stephen Foster had, I don't know how many number ones. He should have been a multi-millionaire, and he died in a pauper's hospital in New York City, which is just tragic, you know. So it's just really, really a sad thing, and yet it makes it rich. It truly, truly does make it rich. You know, and there were a lot of people who were good writers and poets, and all of a sudden, but since they would write poems to a melody that they knew and everybody else knew because they weren't musicians. So a lot of people became songwriters because they could borrow melodies, just like you said. And, you know, a lot of people wrote songs to the melody of, and they became, quote, songwriters, you know. And that's very true. That's very true. But that you're on it, I think. I totally agree with what you said.
I've got a question for you. First of all, I'll give you the accolades here. She says, Bobby, you're a true, he says, Bobby, you're a true gentleman and patriot, music legend. I remember hearing your very plaintive, slow acoustic version of Dixie from the Ken Burns Civil War. Of course, that's my favorite too. And he says, it's always emotional for me, very emotional. And he loves your Homespun series. He says the kids have grown up with that, but he has a question. How do you choose which versions to play and arrange in those? And are you relying on the old sheet music, or do you have more freedom in your arrangements? He said your Dixie is different from everybody's Dixie, you know, for example. So how do you do that when you go in your studio there at your house? That's why it's homespun, by the way, if you don't know. He records it right there at home, which is, it's great. You know, he doesn't go to some recording studio. It's right there in his house. These are homespun songs. So how do you come up with this?
You know, it's funny, but when I just, like in 2020, I finished Benjamin Franklin for Ken, you know, and the guy was talking, said, well, where did you record this? I said, bedroom number 4. And he put that on the thing, as my credits on the film. And there was a guy that tried to Google bedroom number 4 to see where that studio was in Birmingham. And he got to me, and I told him, well, it's here at the house. Anyway, but that's an excellent question. I love to work from sheet music, but you know, when I first started this, Brian, and this hopefully will answer his question, but when I first started this, I studied. I grew up here down at my grandfather's. He had a wind-up Victrola, and he used to play Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers and Riley Puckett and all these early Southern recording artists. And music had not changed in 50 or 60 years at that point. So when you listen to them, you were listening to the same way the string bands played in the 1860s, because nothing had influenced them. They didn't have radio. They didn't have anywhere to hear anything other than but what they knew and what they were taught by their grandpa or their uncle or their daddy. And so what happens in those kind of situations is you turn on the record and they play you may have 6 instruments playing, but they play wide open from the front all the way to the back till the time runs out, and then they sort of stop. You know, it's interesting. But so there were no dynamics. There were no, and you didn't arrange back then. In other words, you know, like we're used to hearing the bed is laid, the guy sings, and then here comes a break in between the verses, and a fiddle comes in or keyboard or whatever it is, or a horn of some sort, and then they back out to give it back to the singer. Well, they didn't do that in those times. Everybody played wide open from start to finish. So I said, I don't want to be boring. So what I did, I'm not going to arrange like I do modern. In the very beginning, I stewed over this for quite some time. I said, how in the world do I do an arrangement that won't be so, you know, repetitive that people fall asleep during it, you know? So I said, there's a campfire, one instrument starts. The second verse, here comes another. Here comes another. So I build it. No, once you're in there, I mean, it's you know, they're into the game's over. And so, but that's the way I decided to arrange these things, where it wouldn't be quite so boring, and it would have kind of a variety. So my variety would come in who would start it. And so it just, each instrument would come up with campfire. And that's in my mind, that's what I was doing. And that's the way I've always done my arrangements on my recordings, because just where it wouldn't get so old so fast, And, but I do work from sheet music. I have, in fact, I had an original Bonnie Blue Flag sheet music, and I had taken it out on the back porch because I was cleaning, and then somebody thought it was trash and threw it away. And
oh no,
oh no, yeah, but it was an original Bonnie Blue. Yeah, I've got quite a few around here, but they wrote. There are plenty of songbooks that were written really in the 1880s. I don't know how many songbooks came out with the way the soldiers sang these things, because it was for them, for the veterans, you see. And I've got a collection of old books. I have a book of Southern Harmony, 1835. It's raggedy, but it's here. And I have I've got the books here, and the Sacred Heart songbook, and I do love those things. But I work from those sources, whenever possible. And I try to arrange plausibly to the 1860s, when I do this. And I don't use an instrument that wasn't around. I mean, as far as sound, I have a pre-Civil War Martin guitar, and I have an old Dobson banjo, open back Dobson banjo, and I've got my fiddles, really 1717 is the one I use when I play that. In fact, I have a cornet that was carried by a New Jersey regimental band member named Mertz, M-U-R-T-Z. It's a Henry C. Diston 3-valve piston valve, which was brand new. That's new technology in 1862 when it was made. And he carried that in the war. And that's what I play when I play brass stuff. I got an old euphonium that I have no idea. It's old. So I try to use the old instruments to get that sound. And like I use this one a lot. This is an 1880 Washburn, but it's got that just an incredibly warm sound. So I try to be true to it as I can, and I try not to Hollywood it up or anything like that. But that's what the just arranging. I have every step of it. I thought through it before I got going on this thing, because I want to be as authentic as I could without being boring.
That brings up two questions I have for you. First, story. I have a friend of mine, Tom Daniel, and you came out and performed, and he was up there on the stage with you, and he picked up your guitar, and he realized how old that guitar was. He said, "Oh, I'm not playing that," and he set it right back down. He didn't want to damage the guitar. Oh. He said, "I'm not touching these. That's too valuable for me."
Well, they made it this far, man. They're made to be played. They really just got a good case for it.
But when you started doing this and you started thinking about these old tunes, and you said you were influenced by your grandparents, but how did you start? You started acquiring books. Did you ever go into any archives, find anything that we thought, wow, I mean, this has been completely lost?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. I just done I was working on a film score for a movie that a guy named Milton Bagley was making. Great guys, sharp man, and a really fine fellow. And the setting, it was a kind of a love story like thing, and it was set in 1863 in Southern Indiana. And the setting was, Milton was a historian. He loved history. And so it's a plausible setting. It looked like John Hunt Morgan's coming their way. And so they were preparing for him. There was, and of course he turned and went into Ohio, and did come into Southern Indiana, but they're preparing for him just in case he comes, And so I said to Milton, I said, I can make up little old dippy melodies, or, wouldn't it be neat if I could find some songs, and this way I put it to some songs that were would have been sung by these folks if they were real people. And he said, that's a great idea. So I went down to the Southern History Room. This is way before internet. Went to the Southern History Room of the Birmingham Public Library. And I went in special collections, and I found like 150 songs that day. sheet music. And I said, I said, wow, this is incredible. I had no idea. I mean, I knew Dixie, I knew Bonnie and Flag, I knew Goober Peas, I knew, you know, the ones I'd sung in grammar school. But I didn't have any idea that music was as important as it was. So that just intrigued me. And so I was on a quest. And when I got through with the movie, I was also asked by my SCV camp to present Confederate music, authentic. And, you know, I just happened to have all this stuff. And so I put the music together and gave a program. And I was all down in the dumps when it was all over. I said, man, I've had such a good time in this world, you know. And I said, you know, I wonder if I would do a recording. I wonder what's out there. And I went looking. I went to Shiloh, and I went to their bookstore. And the Mormon Tabernacle Choir had a great, you know, album of Civil War tunes, North and South. And then Tennessee Ernie Ford had a really neat North and South, same story. It's been done during the centennial in the 1960s. But he had a jazz combo behind him. I said, that doesn't sound like those guys. What is that about? You know, I might do that. And so I started putting down my research. You know, I didn't want to lose my research. And so I started recording. I started building them. I said, and I've decided that, you know, there may, if I wanted, I would love to listen to this as I toured the battlefield. I bet other people would too, because, you know, I'm a geek in a geek world, you know, and I know that geeks love that kind of stuff, and I'm one of them. That's the reason I knew, you know, do unto others. You know, I said I'd love somebody to lay it on me, you know, and so anyway, that's how I got started, and I was just want to be as authentic as I could be, because that was the thing that made me think that maybe I could do this, because while Mormons are, the Tabernacle Choir is great. And I love Tennessee Ernie Ford. But anyway, I said, there's nobody that I knew of. There was a guy that had an old Martin guitar pre-Civil War, and he played some tunes, but nobody showed him how to tune it. It's kind of tough, you know, but the guitar sounded good. Yeah. But anyway, I said, so that's how I got started on this stuff. I thought, you know, others might like it, because this is an untold part of people that I admire very much, you know, and I'm mostly, I got Southerners in my tree, but I have Yankees in my tree from New York, you know, and I'm proud of them as well. And I realized that music and their faith was all they had. That's what sustained them. That's why this stuff is important, if you want to get to the heart of the common soldier who answered the call of their state, you know, in 1860, 61, you know. That's how it got going. That's how I figured out how to arrange these things, you know. And plus, I don't play an instrument sound that was not available in 1860s, you know.
You mentioned that when you said you learned Dixie and Bonnie Blue and Goober Peas in school.
Yeah, we used to sing in music class in grammar school. Right. Yeah.
Well, that would be alien today. I mean, can you imagine? This is when we said we're going to try to talk about Dixie. Can you imagine a grammar school today assigning Dixie or teaching the kids Dixie? What do you think's been lost from that? I mean, you grew up with that, and so many people in the South did. Do you think that's caused any kind of cultural dislocation or anything like that's now being erased, and you don't have that continuity anymore between you know, that time period and this time period, that there's something even about that's important?
Well, I think that a lot of people want to erase history in general of this country. You know, it started with Southern history, and it's moving on to other kinds of history. You know, you can't say this. We can't say that. You can't say that. And I heard it used back when Southern things started getting attacked. You know, that people were calling it cultural genocide. And if you think about it, that's kind of what's going on. And anything there is a group, I believe, that doesn't love our country and what it stands for, and the founding and the, you know, all the things that it's ebbs and flows of this country, and they don't want it taught to the young people, and it's very sad to me. It's very sad to me. I mean, you know, going back to the founding and that sort of thing, and the Revolutionary War, they don't know anything about it. They don't know people don't know in the War of 1812 that as the British Army is marching from Washington, where they burned it, marching to Baltimore, they got hit by a tornado. And people don't know that. And you know, it's almost like, and what happened, you know, they've never seen a tornado. And so all of a sudden they're saying, God doesn't want us here.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they were saying. That's what they were thinking. Well, that's not taught. You know, you can't teach that kind of stuff anymore. Apparently.
That's one of my favorite stories. Yeah, I call that the most important tornado in American history, right? We talk about all these major tornadoes. That's the most important. Yeah, that's the most important tornado in American history. Here it is. Without that, maybe something changes and we lose the War of 1812. But that's a great story.
It's a wonderful story, and it's just there's so many. You know, and Brian, I'll tell you, I have such an admiration for people who answer the call, whether it's 1812, whether it's the War between the states, whether it's World War II, and, you know, whether they fought for the Yankees during the 1860s or the Rebs, you know. I mean, they answered the call, and that's what patriotic people do. And I've always championed the common guy, because I don't have any officers in my tree that I know of. Probably have some horse thieves or something, but I you know, I don't have any officers that I know of. But that's who people like my dad. You know, if I can just kind of drift here, I'll never forget, as a kid, I was in grammar school, and I'm 72. I was raised by World War II people, and I revered them. I got them to tell me stories. That's how I got into history, because everybody around me had a story. And how Mr. Capps down at the ball field didn't have any legs. Well, he was in the B-24, and Flack took his legs off, you know, and he told me the story. You know, and so I got a love for these guys. My dad went over to North Africa in 42 and didn't get home till 46, and he was on a hospital ship coming home. He got close enough to the surrender of the German army in North Africa to take pictures himself. And I found a picture of the surrender of North Africa in my history book when I was about 5th or 6th grade. And I said, my daddy was there. He made history, you know, and so history, and I connected my dad with history. And so and it was game on for me. I mean, the common man makes the history. And so the music gets to the heart. A soldier, you know, especially during the 1860s, would write home, but he wouldn't tell about how horrible it was, because he didn't worry mom and dad or the wife and the kids. He would write about other things. He didn't tell them how awful this was. Or on the other hand, he might say, you know, I'm a lot more important, you know, tell him he's more important to Jeff Davis than he really was, you know. So you can't really trust that explicitly in the diaries or the reminiscence, you know, because people have a tendency to exaggerate and that kind of thing. But they sang what they were thinking. That's what they sang. And if you can get to that, you get to their hearts. You get to what's driving them. You get to what's making them go through this awful, awful stuff they're having to live. And the songs go to their heart, you know. And that's why this is so important. If you want to understand the humanity of these people. You know, and I admire the Yankees and the Rebs alike. You know, I really, really do. You can talk to cause, that's a different story, but it's just a common guy that answered the call. They all were caught up in that whirlwind that was not of their making, most of them. Just like World War II. My dad didn't want to go to North Africa, my Lord. In fact, music is so important. He told me one time that they got shipped over in like November of 42. And they were so depressed. He said, I mean, he and all the guys around him were so depressed. And they found a shortwave radio, and they got it working. And believe it or not, from the deserts of Tunisia, they were able to pick up the BBC. And the first thing, he said, the first song they heard, Glenn Miller playing In the Mood, and said, they were all said, oh yeah. And they said it changed everything for them at that moment. You know, so music is that important. And if you're going to study the war, study our Southern ancestors that went through this, or if you've got Yankee ones of them too, you study the music that motivated them, that sustained them along with their faith, you know. And so a lot of the songs of their faith is very important to them as well. But I'm sorry, I've been rambling. And
oh no, that's great.
Up in weeds there. But anyway, it's very important to me. That's the way I see it. That's my goal, is to hold up and to honor these guys, that did what they did in spite of, no hope, especially for the Southern ones. At the end, there's no hope, but they stayed with doing their duty.
This is kind of a specific question, but it's, do you know of any sheet music for a four-handed piano duet of Dixie? Sounds like a player piano. Have you ever seen anything like that? Somebody asked about this specifically.
No, I've seen some four-hand music, but I've never seen Dixie done that way. I know I have not. Sounds fascinating, though. That'd be full, wouldn't it?
Yeah. If anybody has it, you can put it in the chat window on the side there. If anybody knows about it. Let me look here, see if there's anything that people have asked. Go over here. The question is, would you say Dixie or Battle Cry of Freedom will be a better Southern or CSA anthem, or a different song? Which one do you think?
Well, as far as an anthem, to me, there's nothing more moving than Dixie sung slow. It's just so pretty. I mean, that's such a, it's just a it's a melody that you can use all kinds of ways. When you're doing, like when you're doing gather music or trying to come up or write music, whatever, for a film, the best thing you can have is a song you can play fast, slow, same melody, fast, slow, happy, sad. And if you got a melody, you can do it four ways. Man, it's a winner. It's the one you want. You're gonna ride that one all the way through the movie, in and out. Dixie's that way. And in fact, but I've done Bonnie Blue Flag slowly, and it's just moving as well. But then again, I don't know. there's so many great ones, and there was never really. I guess "God Save the South" was as much of a national anthem for the South as there was. Battle Cry, it was a Union tune originally written by George Root up in Chicago, and so I would imagine that would kind of. Well, that didn't stop people from singing Dixie, did it? Come think of it. The first time I'm getting off in the weeds again, but one of the funniest stories to me was Bonnie Blue Flag was premiered down in New Orleans. I don't remember, it's in 1961. And the Terry's Texas Rangers happened to be coming through New Orleans at the time. They're heading what ultimately would be First Manassas. And they went into some music conservatory auditorium where Harry McCarthy, who wrote Bonnie Blue Flag, was performing. And he did Bonnie Blue Flag, and these Texas Rangers were in there, and they went so wild. They were just jumping out and hooting and hollering and rebel yelling and all this stuff. Finally, it died down except for one old guy, and he wouldn't quit hollering. And so the cops came in to, get him out of the auditorium, and he fought them, and then a big brawl came out. So, if you look at it, that's a natural fight song, because first time it's played, that's a big fight. But anyway, that was when Bonnie Blue Flag was premiered in New Orleans. So, fun stories go with that stuff. It really, really does sometimes.
Dixie, of course, is a great tune. Do you have any other songs that are your favorites that, from that period that you just think, man, I love to play that song, or besides Dixie, or it's one that really speaks to you personally? Everyone has a connection with a song, and but are there any that you just have a real connection to from that war period, or even the antebellum period, going back? You talked about Walker and Franklin White and these people.
Yeah, I'll tell you, two songs that really moved me hard. In fact, one of them I try to perform it sometimes, and I choke up. It's so bad I can't hardly get through it. Well, there's three. There's another one about that I can't do because. But first, let's get to the other. I suppose would be best thing to do here. But I think "Wearing of the Gray," because it's written by a veteran. "Wearing of the Gray" just touches me. And there's another one called "Long Ago," to the tune of "When You and I Were Young, Maggie." It's written by a fellow down in Ozark, Alabama, after the war. And he said, I put it on CSA 1. It's called "Long Ago." And that one gets to me because he's looking back and he's saying, long ago we were boys in the ranks, comrades, hearts light and happy as the day, you know. And he's just looking back in it. And I have a soft spot in my head for the veterans, you know, especially the guys as they're looking back. You know, it's just a marvelous thing. And Patrick Claiborne, you know, died at Franklin on November 30th, 1964. He was one of my favorites. And they found him, you know, the battle started at 4 in the afternoon, didn't end until 11 that night. And then Schofield just snuck out during the night, and they accomplished nothing other than getting 6 Confederate generals killed. When I'm being Patrick Claiborne, they found him with his boots off. Somebody had taken his boots. But the urban legend was that as they were marching from Spring Hill, one of his subordinate officers was walking barefoot, and they had macadamized roads there, and it was tearing their feet up. You know, so a bunch of them didn't have shoes, and so apparently, you know, they would march 50 and break 10 the whole day, hurrying to get to from Spring Hill to Franklin. And one of the urban legends was that Patrick Claiborne saw that officer walking with bloody feet. And when they took that 10-minute break, he rode his horse up there and got off and sat next to him and said, man, took his boots off, said, my feet are killing me. See what's wrong with these boots. And then he jumped on his horse and rode off, and the guy wore the boots. And he was found without his boots. You know, because when that attack, he knew it was going to be awful, because Hood should never have done that, according to the people who know what they're talking about. Anyway, there was a lady in Texas who heard this story, and it moved her so much that she wrote a song called "Oh No, He'll Not Need Them Again," which is his boots. And I put this on CSA 6 because it just moved me so hard. And I've talked to like Bud Robertson, I asked him about it, and several of the historians who I, you know, do this to, and they said, no, that's probably an urban legend. It did not, most likely did not happen. They know for sure, but they said, nah, it sounds like there's so much of that went on back then. But the lady in Texas believed it, and she wrote that song and put everything she had in it. And I was recording that here in bedroom number 4, and I laid down all the instruments. I'm not a singer, so I was singing at last. I love to play, but you know, singing is what you got to do. It's part of the process. And I was sitting there trying to get through it, and I just took a break and walked downstairs. And they said, "Well, what's wrong?" I said, "Man, I can't get through this thing. It's choking me up so bad." And she said, "What?" I went and got the words. Look at these lyrics. And she says, "Oh my!" And I eventually got through it. But I mean, I love that one. And I love the story behind it. I love the sentiment and I love Claiborne and his story, and all those poor guys that, you know, got nailed at Franklin, you know, that for no good reason anyway. But anyway, those really stick out in my mind. And of course, I love Dixie. I love Body Blue Flag as well. I truly do. And there's a one that I love that was a going away home from home song, came out of the mountains, and it was sung to the tune of let's see, I'm thinking all these songs are floating in my head right now. I can't really think of. I place my knapsack on my back, my rifle on my shoulder. It was made up in the Smoky Mountains, and that one really gets me. Because it's just an old guy in the mountains. And he's leaving everything, leaving his mom, who's going to take care of my wife and my child and care for my aged mother, you know, and he's going to do his duty, you know, and it's, that one moves me. I always do. There's a piece that Bud Robertson wrote back during the centennial, and I got permission from him. But Dr. Bud was head of the centennial celebration of the Civil War in the United States. He was the man as a young PhD. And he wrote this during that time, and I read it, and I got permission from him. He sent me a copy of it. I've never given it away. I promised him I never would. But I read it and then followed with Beach Spring played on an octave mandolin. And I love that so very much. I look forward to doing that one. So anyway, I'm rambling. You got me.
Oh, no, that's good. I have a hard time hearing Beach Spring without getting choked up. That's such a powerful tune. I mean, it really is.
Theology in a tune. Everything you need to know is right there in that one. Yeah. Joseph H. Hart from England wrote that text in 1759. And B.F. White took the melody, the Beach Spring melody. And it's my understanding it was originally called B-E-E-C-H, beach, like beech tree, Beach Spring. But it's been changed in most hymnals to B-E-A-C-H, Beach Spring. But I told Ken, that was what I used as a theme song for Lewis and Clark, that melody. And I told Ken that or Dayton, whoever I was talking to about it, I spelled it B-E-E because I said, I think it was what they were calling it back then. I don't know that for sure, but the internet wasn't around during that time, so.
That's true. Somebody asked if the Kennesaw line is an era tune, or did you write the music?
No. No, it's not an era tune. Let me tell you, that's one before we get there. Downloads. I love downloads, but I spend so much time on my liner notes to explain the song, and people are downloading that song and think that that's not what's that jerk? That's not a period song, and it's not. I identified in my liner notes. It was written Don Ocean Dunaway from not Jacksonville, right below Jacksonville, Florida, where Fort San Marcos is. St. Augustine is where he's from. And he wrote that a long time ago. He had read Company H, and it moved him so much that he pulled some of Sam Watkins' words and put it into music. And that's where I got it. I got it from Don. And so I just love it because it's Sam Watkins' words. And Sam Watkins, author of Company H, one of my favorite books of all time. And so that's the reason I did that, because it used his words, phrasing from his book in it. So, but that was probably written in 1965 or somewhere around in there, I'm guessing.
Somebody asked you if you knew him. Did you know Don or?
I never met him. We ships passing in the night. I know all his buddies. He knows my buddies, and I've talked to him on the phone. But he's a good guy. But he wrote that years and years ago. But probably coming out of the centennial. But he had read Company H, and that's what spurred him to write that tune. Because Sam Watkins has moved so many people over the years.
Do you know if he wrote any other Confederate tunes? It was part of the question. Has he written anything else, or just that?
Not that I know of. Not war related. No, I don't think so. He's a good songwriter, but I've never seen another one like that. But his inspiration was Sam's book. No doubt about it. Because Walter, he mentions Walter Hood in it, and that's straight out of Sam's book. Incidentally, you can go to his grave. I've been to his grave, and you go to the Zion Church, Presbyterian Church in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, and a lot of the names you see in that book, you see them. They're in that graveyard there. It's fantastic. It's just right up from St. John's Church, where they originally put the 6 Confederate generals before they moved them to their home states. You can see that different churches from that site.
That connection you have there, that human connection you get out of that. Oftentimes we depersonalize. I mean, the whole war has become depersonalized. These people were just bad, or these people were good, or we don't have that personal connection. Music will do that for you, and I think that's one of the things we're really missing.
You got to say when he says so and so's division of 5,000 men, they right wheeled and then they did this and this and this. Man, you got 5,000 beating hearts, and you got 5,000 young people that are just scared to death and would rather be anywhere but there. And we lose sight of all that. These were individuals that made the history, not groups. I don't know. That's where you're right. That's where the music that hits home. The music does.
Here's one that I've heard a story about with Shelby Foote. I'm a Good Old Rebel, and it's one of those fun songs. I think it's fun. It's so much fun. But I heard there was a story. Shelby Foote was going to go speak somewhere, and he was picked up at the airport. And as they got him in the taking him to the talk, he's back there singing "I'm a Good Old Rebel," and I love that. But how do people react to that song when you play? Have you ever played it to an audience that may not be as sympathetic?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And how do they react to that tune?
Well, if you explain it, it's written by Ennis Randolph, who was on the General Lee's staff. He wrote it under an anonymous. Yeah, I mean, he made up a pen name for it. And he really wrote it almost as a comic song. And because originally it's done like, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of free. That's the way he wrote it. But I read an account, and I, being the non-scholar, I wish I could lay my hand on where I found this stuff, but I just remember it, and it just hit me. But I read that there was a gathering even before the United Confederate Veterans was ever formed. There was a Georgia regiment or company that would come together, and that song was out, and it was Reconstruction was going on. A lot of guys were losing their farms and stuff. They were being taxed out of their land, and they were bitter. And a guy got up and sang that song and meant it. I mean, he was angry, and that's the way I recorded it after I read that account. In fact, Mr. Bars, Edward Bars, who was the chief historian for the whole National Park Service, says, he's a grizzled Marine from World War II, and he talked like this, it almost sounded like Nixon, and he had the withered arm. He says, from a 30 cal right here, but he was the greatest guy. And I told you earlier, he was like E.F. Hutton. If he talked, all the historians listen. But he says, Mr. Horton, you did the song too slow. And I said, well, let me tell you why I did that, Mr. Barnes. Explain that and he says, well, I'll accept it. So he semi-approves it. So if he says it's okay, it was okay.
Somebody asked, have you ever considered singing the Song of the South composed by James Huber from Louisville in 1861? Do you know that tune? Or
Song of the South?
Yes, James Huber from Louisville. Do you know that one or not?
I don't know. No. Was it called anything else, perhaps?
I don't know. I don't have anything. But
I would love to hear it. I'd love to know it. Where it is. So I'll write that down. I'll look for it. I got internet now,
You're right.
James Huber, is that
James Huber, Huber. And let me just put a link in. If you look in your computer there's a little link, and it has a link to it on YouTube. So I guess you can look it up. Huber, James H. Song of the South. Or maybe it's not a YouTube, it's a place with the sheet music. But
I'm gonna get a pen right here. I'm in my studio.
All right.
I'm in bedroom number 4. But you can't.
That's what makes these things great.
Do what?
That's what makes these things great. You're in bedroom number 4, and here we are. We're live, and people are getting.
Okay, James Huber, and it's
James H. Huber, Huber. Song of the South, Louisville. That's what it said. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the tune myself, so I've never heard it.
When did he write it?
It says 1861. 1861, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, I shall look for that.
So there's some sheet music out there at Getty Images, so you can find it. I guess you do an internet search and come up with it. Somebody asked your favorite Christian tune, faith-based war song. Anything that comes to mind there would be. That was such an important part of a soldier's life. I mean, you're in this very tense situation, and there's no atheists in foxhole. There's no atheists on the front line when you've got you're standing in front of the blue or the gray, and they're firing point blank at you. I mean, and of course, religion was so important on both sides. But
heaven was the same direction for most soldiers in both armies, really. There's a song that I don't necessarily love the song as much as I love the story that goes with it. And so I always think of this, and I do this a lot when I tell the story. But it's a story about there was you remember how the soldiers would have these just revival services. They stopped marching and somebody they'd have a revival services at the drop of a hat. And it says this one account, it said that there was a Private Goodwin who got saved. Back then they said, instead he got saved, he got religion. It said Private Goodwin got religion, and about 50 of them, put their haversacks and their rifles down. They walked down to the Rapidan River. That's where they were. And there were Yankee troops on the other side, and they hunkered down because they saw people coming. They know what was coming. And they saw that this group was unarmed. And then the chaplain and Private Goodwin walked straight into the river for baptizing. And so the Yankees realized what was going on. So they came out and sat on their headlogs and watched. And they all, when the preacher got them singing, they all joined together from both, and the Yankees did they were singing, there is a fountain filled with blood. Their guilty stains, that one. And he said, the last entry in this story, the way I read it, he said, Private Goodwin was successfully baptized, much to the satisfaction of all on both sides of the river. It was just a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful story. And it shows the commonality of these two sides, and the heaven is the same direction for them, But that just got me. We said, it was much to the satisfaction of all on both sides of the river. That was very, very touching, I love that, but I love Beach Spring. I love, there's another one that was, I am a poor wayfaring stranger. A lot of people think it's contemporary because people still do it a whole lot, but it was written in 1794 in somewhere in the mountains of the South. That's one of my favorites as well. And they're just so many. But the biggest song, really and truly, of the 19th century, I think, was on Jordan's Stormy Banks. I'm bound for the Promised Land. It's called Promised Land or On Jordan's Stormy Banks. And I really do love that one. And because that goes with the story of the hanging of was a young man in Smyrna, Tennessee. I can't think of his name. I talked about him the other day.
Sam Davis.
Sam Davis. Thank you very much. I'm getting old, But Sam, right before they hung him, and he had impressed everybody in there, and he said, I can't, they said, we don't want to hang you, but you got to give us. And he said, I can't betray the trust of a friend or the identity of my confidant. I can't do that, because he had battle plans on him when they caught him. Even though he had his uniform on, they hung him as a spy. They were going to. And he was such a nice young man, they didn't want to do it, but they nails in the board on that deal. And so they gathered, the General Dodge made the Yankee troops gather around the scaffold. And right before they were to hang him, the chaplain talked to him, says, do you have any last requests? And he said, would you sing on Jordan's Stormy Banks? And the chaplain started, and everybody there sang it. And said, and it was, they sprung the trap and Sam Davis dies. One of the touching parts of this story is these Yankee boys were so impressed, they escorted his body all the way from Pulaski, Tennessee, which is where it's happened, all the way to Smyrna, Tennessee. And they buried him with full military honors in his family graveyard. And some of those guys in post-war years would come back and visit the Davis family. So it had a very touching story to go with it. So I think of him with that song, and and you think he's thinking, I'm bound for the Promised Land, and I'm about to go. I mean, you think about that, and so I love that one. I think as much as any for that reason.
Well, we're up against the time here. Yeah, they're great stories, and I told you we only keep you for an hour, so we're up against the time, and we've had a lot of great questions. Bobby, it's been a lot of fun, and these things are just. This is great. And thank you for taking an hour of your time. I know you're busy, and we just getting this thing together. You're here and there and everywhere, and just having an hour of your time is fantastic. So I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll do something like this again sometime.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody that's there. And thank you for being interested in these people, because they're so very important to us. They really, really are. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have a date for the next one of these, but we will have one probably in August, so stay on the lookout for that. But we thank for everybody for coming out tonight, and this will be up on YouTube, so you can catch it later. But Bobby, have a good evening. Everybody else have a good evening too.
Thank you, Brian.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.